because we are going to be in 2 Kings. We'll be in chapter 12 this morning. And where we are in chapter 12 really goes back to what we covered in chapter 11. Of course, all of these chapter breaks were added in by translators over time, so they would not have actually been there in the original, but it doesn't take away from what is here. The chapter breaks and the verses really kind of help us in our minds, but sometimes we can compartmentalize and forget that it all is working together. So chapter 11 flows right into chapter 12, because chapter 11 is all about kind of figuring things out in Judah. And so we've been mainly focused on Israel, but we're looking at Judah right now. And in Judah, you had King Ahaziah, who was killed by Jehu, going back into chapter 9 and chapter 10. And then chapter 11, after Ahaziah's death, Ahaziah's mother, Athaliah, we talked about, how she was not the best mother nor the best grandmother, because she tried to kill off everyone who could take her position to the throne. But there was a 1-year-old little boy who she missed, because he was taken, hidden in the temple. His name is Joash, and so that's who we're looking at. Chapter 11, we talked about how Joash became king, all because of Jehoiada, the high priest at the time, who was able to bring things together. And how old was Joash when he became king? 7 years old. And so Joash obviously was a young boy. He was obviously going to need some good direction, some good influence. And I know Kay had actually kind of brought that out. I don't remember if that was last week or the week before, talking about how Jehoiada would have had a big impact on helping to guide and to direct Joash as he became king. And we'll talk more about that even this morning. But that gets us up to where we are, at least in our minds, here in chapter 12. And this is where we learn more about Joash's reign. This kind of gives us some insight, just a small little glimpse into what was going on, kind of the main thing that happened within his reign as king in Judah. So let's have somebody read for us, if you would, 2 Kings chapter 12, verses 1 through 3.
In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. Jehoash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. But the high places were not taken away, and the people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places.
So these verses here give us a little bit of insight into the reign of Joash. You've got verse 1 where you can kind of see the time frame, what it is that's taking place, kind of how all this lines out chronologically speaking. He was in the 7th year of Jehu, as Jehu was reigning in Israel, when it is that Joash, and you'll notice now it's kind of referring to him as Jehoash, same individual. We talked some about that last week with some of the difference in names, and sometimes that's more than anything, I think, just to kind of help try and create some differentiation. But I'm probably still going to keep referring to him as Joash, because that's how we were at least first introduced to him. So you have Joash, who is now king, 7th year of Jehu, and Joash reigns for 40 years in Jerusalem. And then we have this little tidbit about who his mother was. All it says is that his mother was Zibiah of Beersheba. Betty, you had asked, when we started chapter 11, because you have everything with Athaliah, and then it's the aunt Jehosheba who takes him to the uncle Jehoiada in order to save him. And Betty, you asked, well, where's his mom? We don't know, right? We don't know where his mom is. In fact, it's not until chapter 12 that we get mention even of his mom. But this is the only thing that we know about her. If you try to look up the name, look her up, if there's any other references, you're not going to find it. So we don't really know much about her other than her son becomes a king. And obviously she had been married to Ahaziah, because Joash is Ahaziah's son, and she was from Beersheba. So that's all I've got for you on his mom. I wish I had more, but that's all I can give you. And so we see then the time frame of his reign. And within the 40 years of his reign, Joash did some good. And we're going to look at some of that good that he does, even specifically in chapter 12. That's the bulk of the chapter, as we're going to get into when he's repairing the temple, the good things that were done. But I want us to notice out of verse 2. It tells us that he did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days in which what? In which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. What's that mean?
Implies when he wasn't being instructed, maybe he didn't do.
Exactly. Whenever he did not have that good instruction from Jehoiada, he wasn't doing the things he needed to do as king. And really, that's going to bear out more when you look in the Chronicles, and we'll kind of be making some reference over there as we go. And of course, we can even see in verse 3 that there's a little bit of I don't know what word I'm looking for right now. There's a little bit of, I guess, a foreshadowing of some of the things that would be taking place as the high places were not taken away and the people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. But you think specifically in verse 2 about the impact that Jehoiada had on Joash. What important lesson do you think we might be able to learn from that influence of Jehoiada?
Seemed like he could have been at least a little bit of a mentor of sorts, but it's like he was able to, uphold what he instructed him so long as he was there, but he never really grounded himself to be able to do these things once Jehoiada was out of the picture.
And we're going to get to that as we keep moving through the chapter of kind of how Joash didn't take advantage of it like he fully should have. But I want to focus more on what you first said in that he's kind of like a mentor. Think back to what we talked about, especially kind of chapter 2, chapter 3 with Elijah and Elisha. And we talked about the importance of having a mentor and good influence. Is that not what Jehoiada is giving to Joash? He's 7 years old and he's king. He needs some help and some guidance, doesn't he? You think about as well, he's 1 year old when it is that he is hidden from his grandmother. His actual father has been killed. He needs a fatherly figure. And who stepped into that role? Jehoiada, who was the high priest. And from all indication, it really seems like Jehoiada was trying to do the best he could to remain faithful and to be who God wanted him to be. And that was only going to carry over to Joash. And that seems to truly be the case, because as long as he had the good influence of Jehoiada in his life, Joash was going to do what was right. So what do you think maybe we can take from this and then apply for some of our interactions today?
It's important who you surround yourself with.
Exactly. It matters who we surround ourselves with. Think about it from Joash's perspective. It matters for us who it is that we listen to. It matters for us what type of sermons we are listening to, what type of books we are reading, what type of podcasts we are listening to, what videos we are watching. All of these things matter because all of those things that are going in are influences. I understand that there's no way that we can possibly filter out everything that's bad, that there are going to be things that slip through, that there are going to be certain things that we see, certain things that we hear. But do we continue to seek those things out? Do we continue to go to those things that are not going to be good influences on us to guide us and to move us in the right direction? So we have to make sure, to Candy's point, that we are surrounding ourselves, yes, physically with the right people, but also understanding, of course, the broader nature of that as well. What about this from Jehoiada's perspective? You had something, Alex? Right.
Very clearly followed Jehoiada, but it doesn't seem like he had any strong faith in God himself.
Yeah, if you didn't hear Alex, recognizing that we cannot be saved on someone else's faith, that our faith has to become our own, and that's going to be another one of the big points that we'll make even a little bit later in the chapter. So we'll come back to that, and I know Jared was kind of pulling that out as well. But also think about in this kind of where I'm trying to get us to from the perspective of Jehoiada is that we need to be someone else's Jehoiada. We need to be able to recognize the impact that we can have. Sometimes we think, well, I can't do that much. Maybe we think, well, I'm not necessarily out front, and I don't like whenever all the eyes are on me. But that still does not mean that we cannot have a good impact and good influence on someone's life. That we need to be able to look and to see who is it that I can help to guide in the right direction. You have Jehoiada and Joash. Think about the years that they would have been spending together. Think about the counsel and the direction that Jehoiada gave. And think about how hard it would have been. Because what was the spiritual state of Israel coming up to this point? Or spiritual state of Judah? It was not good. You had going back to even Athaliah right before, and all of her wickedness, and then before that you had Ahaziah, who was not doing right. You see very clearly that there was the issue that there was a temple built to Baal there in Jerusalem, and everyone, even as we're going to see, was neglecting and ignoring the state of the temple in Judah, in Jerusalem. And so they were not the people they needed to be. Yet what was it that we saw Jehoiada trying to do in chapter 11 with now promoting Joash and anointing him and making him king? Jehoiada was trying to turn the people back to God. And you see more than once in chapter 11 about the covenants that were made, all of which were pointing the people back to God. And then, of course, you see as soon as Athaliah is killed, and as soon as all the people are recognizing Joash now as king, do you remember what it is they did in verse 18? They went and destroyed the temple of Baal and killed the priest of Baal. They were trying to restore true spiritual worship, true living according to the law back to the land. Now, of course, we're going to see there were still difficulties to that, and it was only going to go so far, because as we've already noted, once you get into verse 3, there was still some of the bad within Joash's reign, and that's going to come forth more as we continue and get further into the chapter. But even within it, we see, again, verse 3, specifically what's mentioned right now. You had the high places that were not taken away. The people still sacrificed. They burned incense on the high places. And so we know that while there was good that was done, the entirety of Joash's reign was not good. There was still some bad that was there. And it's interesting to me because we just noted what it was they had done in chapter 11 and verse 18 with destroying the temple of Baal out of Jerusalem. But what did they leave intact for the people to be doing? They left the high places. They got rid of an idol in Jerusalem and a temple to an idol in Jerusalem, and that was a good thing, but they left their idols at the high places. And it tells us it's not just the case that they left these places there, but the people were still sacrificing and burning incense on the high places. Now, I saw some suggestion on this, that some were suggesting, well, maybe it wasn't that they were actually offering things to idols at the high places at this time, because after all, what we're about to see, the temple was in terrible shape. It needed to be repaired. Maybe that's the case. But nonetheless, even if that is the case, was that what they were supposed to be doing? No. And what we come to find, and we realize, and we've made application of it before, that sometimes even when we're doing the things we think to be right, what we're really doing is turning something into an idol. And so that's really what was going on. But we have to understand that this was not supposed to be taking place. Now, I mentioned earlier that we get a little bit of a fuller picture of some of the things that were happening, and it helps us to see the bad side of Joash's reign if we go to the Chronicles. Let's turn over to 2 Chronicles 24. Second Chronicles chapter 24. And if y'all would, read with me beginning in verse 17. Now after the death of Jehoiada, the leaders of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. Therefore they left the house of the Lord God of their fathers and served wooden images and idols, and wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem because of their trespass. Yet he sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord, and they testified against them, but they would not listen. Then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest, who stood above the people, and said to them, Thus says God, why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, He also has forsaken you. So they conspired against him, and at the command of the king they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. Thus Joash the king did not remember the kindness which Jehoiada his father had done to him, but killed his son, and as he did, he said, the Lord look on it and repay. So how bad did it get for Joash? He had destroyed the temple of Baal, but as soon as Jehoiada dies, what do his influences tell him to do? Let's go ahead and get some idols back in Jerusalem. And then as if that's not enough, God is sending prophets. God is sending His messengers to the king, trying to turn them back. But what are they doing? They're ignoring them, disregarding them, getting to the point of killing them. But do you notice who it is specifically that's named, this last one that came that they killed? It's Jehoiada's son. Which means that in all practicality, who was he to Joash? His brother. That's how far he had gone. From all the good in his reign to then that point of the bad. And we've already been, seeing glimpses and pulling some good application, thinking about how just because you start good doesn't mean you're going to finish good. And we talk about how it is that you got to make your faith your own. And these are all points that we're going to be coming back to as we keep working through the chapter. But let's get into this next part here, verses 4 to 16. We'll see the good in repairing the temple. But Dina, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I have a quick question, and if you covered this, I apologize. How old was Joash when Jehoiada died? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how old he would have been. We're going to see here in just a second with the temple that there's a mention of, I think it was like 20, in chapter 12, verse 6, that there was at least a time period of 23 years that had elapsed. So we don't know if this is something that was taking place early in Joash's reign when all of this begins, and then 23 years later we see. My assumption would be this is probably a little bit into the reign, just because it seems like Joash is going to be talking fairly authoritatively. And a 7-year-old boy is not going to be telling them, well, priest, y'all go collect the money for the temple. That's something, and to me it seems like this is probably several years down the road, and they're going to start the process, but in 23 years we've seen, well, they haven't got where they needed to be. Chances are that's because Jehoiada was probably quite a bit older by then, maybe nearing the end of his life whenever we get to some of these things that are going on. But we really don't know specifically the age on that.
I was just trying to figure out where the breakdown was with Jehoash, like what,
Right.
or where did it go wrong, I guess.
Yeah, and that's something that maybe if we have time we'll be able to kind of come back and ask that question and think about that, because that is it's interesting for us to try to look at and think about. But then also we stop and think about our own lives when it is that we've had a Jehoiada, a good influence, but we understand in our own lives that we still at times, there's a breakdown there, right? Like you said. And we've got to be able to recognize, how did that happen? How can I prevent that from happening again? And so that's a good question and kind of good thought thinking about and trying to figure that out. So let's look now in verses 4 to, actually, Jared, there's your hand back there.
I'm just going to mention, I think it really kind of shows maybe where his heart was all along. Like he recognized Jehoiada as an authority figure, and he was willing to submit to the things that he would say or instruct. But maybe it's kind of telling of where his heart was the whole time. As soon as Jehoiada's out of the picture, he immediately then turns away from everything that he had been taught. Maybe just a little bit of reflection of where his heart was.
Well, and you look at it, and I think that this goes back to what Candy had brought up earlier about it's important who we surround ourselves with. Because based on what we read there in 2 Chronicles 24, what was it that happened after the death of Jehoiada before it was he turned to the idols? He listened to his friends and other people who came to him and brought these ideas. And so his heart, if his heart was where it needed to be, he would have done what was right. But he also seems very much to have been a follower, that he needed someone to tell him what to do, and whatever it was that they said to do, he obviously was going to go ahead and do it. And that also, I think, shows perhaps the, even to a greater degree, that influence of Jehoiada, that people knew they weren't going to accomplish anything of bringing idols in as long as Jehoiada was still there, as long as he was still living. But it's not until he dies that now it's like they were just waiting on it. So now we can get rid of the temple. Let's go back to the idols. Did I see your hand, Candy, and then Jen?
A good point to parents who have children who fall away, and I think a lot of parents tend to blame themselves, what could I have done different? So this man raised both of these men and had good influences on both of them, but then one fell away and one remained strong, ended up, dying in the name of the Lord. And so I think we just need to make sure that we always remember, as our children get adults, that's their choice. You just can do what you can do, and then the blame is not there on you anymore. So it's just a good lesson to realize, we're just sowing the seed, but we can't make them Christians.
Yeah, great point to bring out from that, of recognizing, especially there, how Jehoiada, you have the one son who remains faithful. You have Zechariah who comes and he proclaims the word of the Lord and loses his life for it, while his brother, the other one who was raised by Jehoiada, had turned away and is the one who kills him. But like you say, we've got to do our part, plant the seed, and understand that at some point it just comes down to our children, comes down to the individual. As Alex mentioned, our faith is going to have to be our own. We can't be saved on someone else's faith. And we'll, kind of keep circling back to that, especially once we get toward the end, where we see some more of the bad that comes up. And then I saw Jim's hand, and did I see your hand as well, Alex? Okay.
According to Google, it says Joash was 40 when Jehoiada died.
Okay, so that very well could be. Google's never wrong, right? But yeah, no, it's certainly a possibility, because like I said, it seems to me that it would have been a little bit later on in the reign before we start to see some of these things.
He's 40, so he had a lot of years that he had guidance,
Mm-hmm.
and then fell away after.
And when he fell hard, right? He didn't even have compassion on his own brother. He didn't have compassion. He didn't remember. I believe it. The phrasing it used in 2 Chronicles 24 was basically he did not remember his father Jehoiada. He had just shut those things out because he knew it was wrong. That's something that we see at times, that we know what's right, we know what's wrong, and if we're going to decide to go wrong, then we're just going to go full-blown wrong, right? We're not going to try to keep in remembrance any of the good, because the conscience is going to convict. Something to think about there.
He has some of his grandmother's genes.
Yeah, we forget maybe who his grandma was, right? She obviously didn't teach him how to love and how to have compassion. Brother Paul?
In a lot of cases where people become, they want to put away things that they're either envious of or jealous of, or is not like them. They don't want to be responsible to God. And, this may sound a little odd, but we ought to be jealous of Jesus Christ. In other words, we ought to be envy the attributes, want to have that, want to be that. That's the only thing we should ever on this planet be jealous of, is wanting to be Christ-like. Strive to have that. There's no person on this planet we should be jealous or envious of. It ought to be Jesus that we're jealous of. And that's what we strive to be.
Right, and whenever we lose sight of that, and the other things get in the way, and that's what we want, that's what we work for, that's what we strive for, that's when we start to be turned away from the good influence and the good impact, because it's not pointing us to Jesus, and that's when the problems start to come in. But at least early on in Joash's reign, he was looking with the right mindset, and he wanted the right things, and that really shines forth right here in the middle of the chapter when we get to verses 4 through 16, where we see these repairs on the temple. Let me have somebody go ahead and read 2 Kings chapter 12, verses 4 and 5, looking at the instruction he gives as this begins.
And Jehoash said to the priests, all the money of the dedicated gifts that are brought into the house of the Lord, each man's census money, each man's assessment money, and all the money that a that a man purposes in his heart to bring into the house of the Lord, let the priests take it themselves, each from his constituency, and let them repair the damages of the temple whenever the dilapidation is found.
You got the one with all the fun words.
I only use those words.
And so we see here Joash is giving instruction about what to do to take care of the temple. It talks about in verse 4 how the priests were to collect all of the money. New King James says of the dedicated gifts. If you're using the New American Standard, it says the sacred things. English Standard here says the holy things that were brought into the house of the Lord. And these were going to come from various different places. You have the census money that they would be bringing in, and that's going to go back to Exodus chapter 30, where you can read about kind of how all that comes about. You have the assessment money, which goes back to Leviticus chapter 27. And then you have all the money that the man purposes in his heart to bring into the house of the Lord. And this is speaking of a free will offering. So you have the required offerings, and then there are also those who are just giving out of the goodness of their heart, out of their excess, in a free will offering, which you can go back and kind of see how all that comes to play in Exodus chapter 35. But all of this is to be taking place in each of the priest's constituency. There's the fun word, right? Constituency. Really what this is talking about, and when I was first kind of going through it, I was looking at it and I'm like, man, this is a lot. This is everybody coming to Jerusalem in order to have all this go about. But really what it seems like is this is also meaning, when you talk about each priest from his own constituency, is talking about they're going kind of to their specific places, right? Not all of the priests are located in Jerusalem. They're spread throughout, right? The Levites, the priests, they did not have a land allotment for themselves, and so they were scattered throughout each of the tribes. But if you look in 2 Chronicles chapter 24 and verse 5, 2 Chronicles 24 and in verse 5, we see this is what was going on. He gathers all the priests and the Levites, and he tells them, go out to the cities of Judah and gather from all Israel money to repair the house of your God from year to year, and see that you do it quickly. And then we'll catch the last part of verse 5 here in just a moment. So they were to go and gather all of these funds, and what was the purpose for? So that they could repair the damages of the temple, wherever any dilapidation, there's your another fun word for you, wherever any dilapidation is found. So evidently, the temple was not in good shape at this point. It had been roughly 125 years or so since the temple had been built. And within that time frame, you had some really good years, but you also find a lot of bad that was taking place. Now, you had high places that would end up being built, so not everybody's coming to the temple like they should have. You find how it is that even in Jerusalem, where the temple was, and the city of God and the city of David, how it is even that the people were now turning to and taking more pride in a temple to an idol than they were a temple to the living God. And that was a problem. It had been severely neglected, and it was time to fix it. And so if you just try to think about how beautiful the temple was built, and all of the ornate decoration and everything that went into it with the gold and the silver and the bronze, and just the way that it would have struck awe and wonder in you had you seen it at its height right after it's built in the days of Solomon. And then you think about now how it's spoken of, that there are damages, and would you ever expect for the temple to be described in a way that there is dilapidation? What comes to your mind when you think about a building that's dilapidated?
Barely standing.
It's barely standing. There are holes in the roof. There are maybe like 2 shingles still up there. Windows are broken. Boards are falling off. We have the picture in our mind.
Tape wrapped around the outside saying, do not.
Yeah, you got the yellow tape around it, right? Caution tape. That's the temple right now. How can you function, and how could you truly worship Almighty God in a building that has damages and dilapidation that's just been left ignored all these years. Joash says it is time. And this is why, Dina, back to your question earlier with some of the dating and time and age and stuff, to me it seems like this is probably going to be a little bit further into Joash's reign, because he's speaking much more authoritatively, and he's basically saying, what have we been doing? Right? This needs to be done. This needs to be repaired. Culturally speaking, it said a lot about the state of Judah as spiritually, culturally and spiritually. But thinking about it, thinking about that picture of the temple just being left in disrepair, dilapidation, what does it say about their spiritual state?
It just wasn't important to them.
Alex said it's dilapidated, right? Which, Candy, it's not important, right? There were more important things to them than the temple of God, than the worship of God. It was possibly out of sight, out of mind. I mean, they saw it because it was a big building there, but they weren't going there. They were not entering in. They weren't concerned with the goings-on of the temple. In that time frame, from what I understand of kind of what I've been looking at, basically they said that the state of the temple reflected the health and well-being of that particular god. Understand, thinking about it from a pagan aspect where you have all of the idols. And so within each particular city, you would have a city god. You'd have a kind of an idol there. There'd be some sort of an altar, maybe some sort of a temple. And the priests to that god, to that idol, it said, they'd go in each day. They would bathe their god. They would feed their god. They're making sure that everything on the inside, everything on the outside is right. Because that's how you make sure that your God stays healthy. That's the mindset of the people during that time frame. So what do you think the people think about the God of Israel when they see the temple in Jerusalem? He's dead. And really, to the bulk of Judah, he was. Because they weren't concerned with what was right. They didn't care if God was alive or if God was dead. But how much had God done for them up to this point? Far more than they deserved. And every time they did something that was just stupid, if I can put it that way, what did God do? He was merciful. He was patient. He was forgiving. And then they turn around and do it all over again, and what does God do? He's merciful. He's patient. He's forgiving. He's gracious. Time and time and time and time again, yet they're leaving the state of His temple in disrepair, in dilapidation, neglecting the temple, and in fact neglecting the Lord God Almighty. And that's no surprise when you think about the previous kings, when you think about their focus on Baal being there in Jerusalem and all of these situations that were going on. They were ignoring the temple, they were allowing it to decay, and Joash says it's time to fix it. And so the priests were going to be going out, collecting the money from these different places, and they were to be collecting it, bringing it back for the temple to be repaired. But if you read ahead in 2 Chronicles 24 and verse 5, the last little phrase there, Joash told them to go and to do it quickly. However, the priests what? Did not do it quickly. And that's what's going to come up in verse 6. Once you get to the 23rd year of his reign, and it tells us the priests had not repaired the damages of the temple. And so I heard the first bell a second ago, and I don't really want to get much further because we're going to run out of time, but I think this is probably a pretty good break point just to kind of at least get into this with the repairs of the temple, thinking about the spiritual state of Judah. But with this, I think there is maybe another application we can make and just something for us to think about as we finish up class. Well, let me ask this. Is it necessary to have a physical building, a, quote, church building like this? It's not a necessity, right? We could meet in a home. We could meet together at a park, right? We can be together because we understand that we are the church. But being blessed with a building like we have, does it matter how this building looks?
Yes.
Absolutely it does. Because is our culture really much different than what they had during that time? That in that time, they saw the temple, and like we recognize, they're thinking that God is dead. And if he's not dead, he's barely breathing, right? Think about the case if it is that our building is to fall into disrepair. People drive by out here on Main Street. And what do you think that they would think if our building is not kept up well? Do those people even care? Is it even worth going there? Are they even alive spiritually? Now, I understand, again, that does not, that doesn't, it's not a necessity. It's not anything that is like book, chapter, verse that you have to have the most beautiful church building in town. Nothing like that, but just thinking about it practically, thinking about it logically, thinking about it as well from an aspect of stewardship. If God has blessed us with the ability to have this, then we need to do our part to maintain it, to take care of it. And I would say that we do a pretty good job here. And that's a wonderful thing. It's not like this everywhere. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up right there, because that second bell should be ringing here in just a moment. But that's just something for us to think about as we finish up.